guys, it's Nikki here. I'm here today to do my spoiler-filled review for Ender's Game by Scott Orson card. If you haven't already read the book and do not want to be spoiled, I will click away from this video. I will include a link below to my spoiler-free version of. So now I'm gonna move on. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I have been for a long time, and since I discovered this book, I don't even remember how many years ago, I've read it many times over. It's a personal favorite of mine. I've reread it probably 6 or 7 times just in the last 2 or 3 years alone. And one of the reasons I enjoy it so much is because it's from Ender's perspective. It has this really nice childlike view of all of this military strategy, propaganda, and psychological manipulation. And it goes on in the book, and I find it very engaging, and the pacing in the book is very good because of how they work everything in and intertwine every aspect of the story. So the summary I had mentioned in the spoiler-free version of this video, but if you haven't seen it, I will do another quick one here. You follow Ender from the age of 6 on through school and training, through all the different command and fleet schools. The intention is for the military to make him into the next big kind of military leader, commander, or admiral, whatever was needed at the time. And the book is done largely from Ender's perspective, with a little bit of military commentary here and there, filling in context for some of what's going on in the chapter to give you an idea of what's going on outside of Ender's perspective, because he doesn't know everything, and and some information is being deliberately withheld. So really, overall, what they're doing is taking this 6-year-old, they're training him to be great, which in their mind is what they need, but in reality, it's one very small step short of breaking him entirely. And with my summary done, I will now move on to my likes and dislikes. Okay, so my likes and dislikes for this book. I'd mentioned 3 likes and dislikes in the previous video. A few of them come up here, but there isn't as much overlap because I can go in depth more here. One of my big likes for this book is the pacing. The pacing is very effective, very efficient at moving the story in the direction it needs to go, at the speed it needs to go. It's slower where it needs to be slower, but most of the time it is gripping, and even though I know what happens because I've read it so many times, it keeps me on the edge of my seat, and I don't want to put the book down because I'm enjoying the story so much. Another like for this book for me is that there's a lot of engaging characters. Many of them are flawed, although they're flawed in different ways. You have people like Hiram Graff and Dapp and Anderson. They're military commanders or officers that deal with Ender as he's going through school. And they're kind of shaping him how they want him to be while monitoring his status so they don't break him entirely. Then you have Peter Wiggin, who is the eldest of the Wiggin children and Ender's older brother, and he is just a crazed psychopath, and he is just this terrifying, flawed character that is very interesting to read, and I'll go a bit more into him in the characters when I talk about them. When I say that the characters are flawed in different ways, even Ender is flawed to some extent, but because of how they use his perspective and how they show the story, a lot of his flaws and actions are forgiven pretty easily by the reader because you sympathize a lot with what he's going through and the stress he's under. Another thing I really liked is the effective use of military strategy, propaganda, and psychology, and how it's all intertwined in education, and it's these adults completely controlling how they want these children to come out. And even though the children do have free will, they have these different ways of monitoring them and introducing the propaganda and military strategy and psychological manipulation into their settings, that they're very effective at molding the students who they need to be what they want. I also really like the ending to this book. I love the ending to this book because, like, some of it is a happy ending and some of it is not. And I love that because you get, like, the happiness of two different societies conflicting, and then you get the happiness of society versus individual happiness conflicting. And I love the way it plays out with Ender, and after everything he's been through up to that point. I love how the ending plays out and everything that happens within it. And it just wraps up the story of this first book so effectively. Next, I'm going to get into kind of my dislikes. There are a couple here. One is the amount of abuse. I had mentioned this briefly in my spoiler-free, and I do understand that with how they want the school to move forward, and for how they want the students to move forward, they are subjecting children to the kind of the adult standards for military. I get that there's urgency behind it. I really dislike that they are trying to justify the abuse they are doing to these children, and to Ender specifically, as like they're justifying it because it's for the greater good. And it really irritates me that that's what they're doing and that's how they're justifying it. The other negative I have here is that not all of the side characters get the same development. And I did mention this again in the spoiler-free portion, but I know it has to do with Ender's perspective and how the school is treating him, how the military commanders are treating him, and just his own kind of outside of society-ness that he already has, getting lost in his own mind. So I know that not all of the characters getting the same love from the author has less to do with the author and more to do with how the story is being driven forward. But there are some characters that I did enjoy Ender's interactions with, so I would have loved to just have entire chapters dedicated to the stories of these kids and the stories of these other characters, because I'd love to spend more time with some of them. That's all it comes down to. And it really saddened me that these characters didn't always get more development, and I didn't always get to know them as well as I wanted. And then the third dislike for me was the school using games to mask war. And while I understand the need for that when they're young, for how much they're pushing the kids and how great the sense of urgency is when you're going through the book, I'm worried that it almost would have backfired on them, because while they have a lot of knowledge and strategy that is acquired through school, there's this lack of realism for what war is. And I think even that it would end up being very psychologically damaging to all of the kids that go to the school. And like I said, there's just a chance that could have backfired on them. It doesn't appear to have, but just the seriousness of the situation and the urgency of the situation were not well conveyed to the student body when maybe it needed to be. And with that said, this is the end of my likes and dislikes. I will follow this up with my character summaries. All right, so now on to the characters. I'll start with Ender. I have already talked about him quite a bit, so I won't spend too much time here. He's intelligent, pragmatic, innocent, and that gives a really nice kind of lens to the entire story as you're viewing it from his perspective. Something I didn't touch on before that I'll touch on now, just because spoilers. He does get mentally and emotionally abused, both by his brother and the military when he's in school. And so it traumatizes his character and stresses his character in such a way that, especially with the military, that they're constantly having to kind of backtrack to try to fix what they've done or to circumvent what they've done. And that just, it feels so terrible because he has to live with what he ends up doing, and he has to live with everything that the military has gotten him to do over the course of his training. And then you get the next character I'm going to talk about is Peter. I'd mentioned earlier, it's oldest brother of Ender and Valentine, oldest of the Wiggins children. And to sum him up, he is everything that Ender fears to be. He is psychopathic, he is manipulative, and he is highly intelligent. Not that Ender fears being highly intelligent. he fears the first two things. And that leads me to Valentine. She is soft, persuasive, and loving. She is too soft for the military, really is what it comes down to. And she, as a child, she is Ender's protector. And the military constantly use her as Ender's connection to humanity because Ender is kind of outside society, just with his intelligence and how he views the world. He has this kind of otherness to himself. And so Valentine is his connection to society and to the world that he's trying to save. And although I liked how both of these characters were written, I love their side story where they write as Locke and Demosthenes. I think I'm saying that right. Demosthenes. And it's very interesting watching their characters develop with that as kind of a driver, and I would have loved way more of it. The next few characters I'm going to talk about, I call them kind of like milestone characters. They are characters that are milestones in the story in some way. So you have Eli. I feel that he has milestone interactions with Ender, kind of when they create this new team, and as they sort out how the launch group is going to work. You have Bonso Madrid, who's also one of the more flawed characters in the story. He functions with Spanish honor, which in and of itself is not a negative, but because he's so stubborn with anything that is related to honor, it ends up making him very flawed as a commander, as he is the Salamander army leader. And there are a few milestone interactions with him throughout the book. And the interactions with Bonso are more character development than they are story drivers, which is I find really interesting, just the dynamic between Ender and Bonso. The final character I'm going to kind of touch on here is Graf. This is the man who is strongly betting that Ender is going to be the next big thing, that he's going to be what they need. He is betting so hard, in fact, that I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have a job if Ender was not performing. But he likes Ender, he likes the kid, and he likes who this child could grow up to be. But he's actively seeking to destroy him. He's actively seeking to train him in such a way that he's what they need in time, and it shows in how he gets Ender to do what he wants, or how he manipulates the situation to get Ender to do what he wants. And he's definitely abusive, and just the things he's doing, not only to Ender but to the kids at the school, is just crazy. And that is going to kind of summarize all the characters I'm going to talk about. There are way more characters than these, and I'm sure there's a lot that you think are more important than this. If you have a specific character you want to talk about, mention in the comments below. I'll do my best to get into the comments and talk to you about them. Just let me know what you think of the characters I've talked about, characters I didn't talk about. And with that said, I will now move kind of to wrap up my review here. I highly recommend Ender's Game by Scott Orson Card. It is a great book. I've read it several times, and I will reread it several more. It uses Ender's perspective so effectively to drive the story forward, and it does this really good intertwining of military strategy, propaganda, and psychology, and it does a really good job of having the side characters also help move the story forward. Just like I said, perspective was good, the story overall is just good, it has great pacing. There was world building where we needed it, although we didn't need much because it is on Earth, so a lot of what they talk about we already know about, and other things are similar enough to what already exists that we're not stretching ourselves to understand them. It really was a fun, solid read and a good book. 5 stars for anybody. It's a 5-star book for me for the reasons I've already listed, and just, if you enjoy sci-fi, you should read it. And I will see you next week with the movie review for Ender's Game. Alright guys, bye! Hey guys, it's Nikki. I'm here to announce my Book of the Month book club book for March. This month I'm reading The Ballroom by Anna Hope. It's a historical fiction romance that takes place in a early 1900s British mental institution. So I'm excited to read it. I think some of the characters are going to be pretty flawed, which will be very interesting. And I'm curious to see how it'll wrap up. I'm hopeful. I want to enjoy it. And I will see you guys at the end of the month when we do the Book of the Month review. Bye.